If you're thinking about selling your home, are you worried about the new real estate changes that just went into effect? Well, in this video, I'm going to break down these changes and how I think they'll impact sellers here in California. Hi, my name is Casey, and on this channel, I share information about the local housing market here in Corona. And I try to help buyers and sellers navigate the real estate changes that seem to be happening almost daily. So if you find this information helpful, I'd really appreciate if you consider hitting the like and subscribe buttons below. Okay, so if you watched last week's video, then you know that I discussed the real estate changes and how they'd affect home buyers. I talked about the new buyer-broker agreements and how compensation is now included in the buyer-broker agreement. I also talked a lot about how buyers will have to sign a buyer-broker agreement just to go out and see a home now. And from what I've seen so far, these changes are affecting the real estate market. Things are slowing down and we're seeing fewer buyers out shopping for homes. And the reality is, these changes will affect home sellers too. So let's take a look and see how. Now in the past, if a person wanted to sell their home, they'd meet with an agent to discuss their options. And during the process, the seller would sign a contract for the agent to represent them. And this contract contained commissions or compensation amounts that the agent would receive if they eventually sold the home. And in almost all cases, the agent would agree to share part of this commission with the agent or the company that brought a successful buyer for the home. And the amount that was going to be shared with the buyer's agent has always been published in the MLS. And this was true for the vast majority of homes that went up for sale. But on August 17th, this all changed. And this is due to the NAR settlement agreement. And in this agreement, the MLS systems across the country can no longer publish any commissions or compensation amounts that would go to an agent representing a buyer. And if you listen to the news coverage, you'll be led to believe that a seller no longer has to pay for a buyer's agent's commission. But like a lot of things on the news today, it's not the entire story. Now the truth is, as a seller, you've never been required to pay a buyer's agent's commission. But for decades now, it's been the common practice in the real estate industry. And it's a business practice that's actually worked and makes sense. And for anyone that currently owns a home, you've benefited from this business practice when you purchased your home. But part of the argument in the lawsuit was that realtors were forcing sellers to pay a fixed 6% commission if they wanted to sell their homes. Now, I don't know what it's like selling homes in other states, but I can tell you that here in California, that's simply not the case. Now, I've been selling homes here for the past 12 years, and I very rarely ever see a full 6% commission. And when I first started in real estate, I remember the average commissions being offered to a buyer's agent was right around 2.5%. Now, in some cases, I'd see a 3% commission, but most were 2.5%, and some were lower at 2 or 1.5. But in the past year or so, and with home prices getting higher and higher, I feel like more sellers have been offering closer to 2% for a buyer's agent. But I think it clearly shows that there wasn't price fixing of commissions at 6% here in California. But unfortunately, this doesn't change anything. As a result of the lawsuit, agents across the country now have to do business under these new rules. Now, I've never been a big fan of punishing people that weren't doing things wrong, but here we are. But here's the problem I see for home sellers. Now, a lot of people are watching the news and hearing that sellers no longer have to pay commission for a buyer's agent. And this statement is just misleading. As I mentioned before, sellers have never had to pay a commission for a buyer's agent. But the truth is, there is a benefit for offering to pay one. It really is the best way to expose your home to the most potential buyers. But here's what I think will happen if a seller decides not to offer a commission to a buyer's agent. I think it will greatly reduce the number of buyers that will actually be able to afford to buy your home. And if this happens, it will take longer to sell your home, and you may end up having to reduce your price. Because here in California, affordability is having a huge impact on buying and selling homes, and these changes are just making it worse. To buy a home here in California, it's very expensive. And on top of high home prices, a buyer has to come up with enough money for a down payment, closing costs, and property taxes. And with the rising cost of homeowners insurance, it's even more money out of pocket for a buyer. So the reality is, if a buyer has to come up with additional money to pay for representation by an agent, many buyers simply won't be able to buy a home. So what's the alternative? Well, a buyer could go directly to the agent that has a home listed for sale and try to buy it from them. And in this situation, the agent will represent both the buyer and the seller. But there's a trade-off here. Having the same agent represent both the buyer and seller can be tricky. Most people believe that an agent would be more loyal to the seller and try to get them a better deal than the buyer, and I'm not sure they'd be wrong. But during the process of buying a home, there are some important steps along the way. Things like getting a home appraisal and getting a home inspection. But what happens if there's a problem? If an agent is representing both sides, they're basically negotiating with themselves. So the agent has the advantage. They know their seller situation and motivation for wanting to sell their home, but they also know everything about the buyer situation too. And this really does put the agent in an unfair advantage when it comes time to negotiate. The agent can steer the transaction either way they want, and that's not a good thing. Now, I have represented both parties on a few transactions over the years, and as an agent, you always like to get paid for both sides. But to be honest, it did make me a little nervous. I never wanted either side to feel like they didn't get the best effort on negotiating and getting them the best deal I could. But I believe that as we see more agents representing both sides, we'll start to see more problems too. I have no doubt that many buyers will be left feeling they didn't get the best representation they deserved. And I'm sure many people will feel like the seller received a better deal. And in the end, this is going to lead to more arbitration cases and more lawsuits. And despite what people are hearing on the news, a seller can still offer to pay a buyer's agent. The rule change simply states that the commission amount can't be advertised in the MLS. So agents can call and speak to the listing agent to see if the seller is willing to pay a commission. Or a buyer can submit an offer for a home and in the offer ask the seller to contribute money to pay their agent. And I'm pretty sure this will become the common way of addressing these commissions as we move forward. But as I mentioned earlier, if the seller refuses and the buyer doesn't have enough money up front to pay for their agent, the deal simply will fall apart. So in my opinion, it is a good idea to offer a commission to a buyer's agent when you're ready to sell your home. And I can honestly tell you that if I was going to sell my home today, I would definitely offer a buyer's agent's commission. And I really believe it would be a huge mistake not to do this. The reality is a lot of buyers simply don't have enough cash on hand to pay this additional fee. And if you eliminate these people from the buyer pool, your home is going to be seen by far fewer potential buyers. Now, in a crazy market, would this matter? Probably not. But in a normal or slow market like we're in now, it could make a huge difference. Your home could end up sitting on the market for months without selling, and it could end up selling for far less than it would if you had offered a commission. So the process of buying a home that we're all used to has changed. And whether you think it's a good thing or a bad thing, these changes are here and we'll all have to adapt. But don't be surprised if there's some bumps along the way. Some buyers aren't going to be happy with having to sign an agreement just to view a home, and I think the number of showings will drop. And some sellers won't want to offer a commission to a buyer's agent because they want to save money. But this could backfire too. But I have no doubt that all of this will have an impact on the housing market as we move forward. So if you're nervous or concerned about these changes and have any questions at all about buying or selling, please let me know. I'll put my phone number up on the screen, and I'll have all of my contact information located down in the description below.